Chapter 1641. The last secret skill. The 7th level was the last level of the Star Moon Tower. After Jian Wushuang appeared in a vast wasteland, he saw his opponent right away. His opponent had already revealed her ancient god body. It was a gold-armored ancient god. However, what was different was that its body was obviously slightly more emaciated and it was not as big as other ancient gods. Lady Jiu Mai, it's you? Jian Wushuang was surprised. Jiu Mai was a 7-star ancient god. The 7th level of the Star Moon Tower was actually personally guarded by her. Jiu Jian, you are very outstanding and I admire your talents. However, even though I admire your talents, I cannot break the rules of the ancient god palace. Hence, when we fight later on, I will not show you any mercy, Jiu Mai said. Lady Jiu Mai, please do your best. Jian Wushuang laughed indifferently. He could tell that Jiu Mai was merely an ancient god shadow. Thus, the abilities that she could unleash would be comparable to a real god's on the real god ranking list, and she was totally within the level of people whom he could deal with. Buzz rippling sword essence appeared from Jian Wushuang's body. In the next moment, Jian Wushuang made his move. Within the 7th level of the Star Moon Tower, Jian Wushuang and Jiu Mai's ancient god were fighting an intense battle against each other. Atop the floating sacrificial altar in the sky outside the Star Moon Tower. I wonder if Jian Wushuang will be able to clear the 7th level. This Jian Wushuang is not stupid. Since he has the guts to challenge the 7th level, he definitely has absolute confidence. But after all, the 7th level is guarded by Lady Jiu Mai herself. A number of top experts were having various discussions. As for Jian Wushuang, not long after he entered the Star Moon Tower, Jiu Mai, who was atop the sacrificial altar and had closed her eyes all the while, opened her eyes. Lady Jiu Mai, how was it? Is Jiu Jian dead or alive? The surrounding ancient gods looked at Jiu Mai in succession. For the result, wouldn't all of you be able to find out by looking? Jiu Mai chuckled. Everyone looked toward the Star Moon Tower at once. All of a sudden, a dim light appeared from the 7th level of the Star Moon Tower. He had cleared it. He actually succeeded. The top experts above the sacrificial altar, as well as the ancient gods below who came to observe, opened their eyes big at that very moment. At that very moment, Jian Wushuang's body had already come out from the Star Moon Tower and he came before the sacrificial altar. Lady Jiu Mai, thank you for letting me win. Jian Wushuang gave Jiu Mai a bow. I did not expect you to possess that kind of peculiar secret skill. Jiu Mai looked at Jian Wushuang with a baffled expression. Jian Wushuang smiled and did not say much. Ling Shan, bring him to the ancient god palace to inherit the last secret skill, King Jiu instructed personally. Understood. Ling Shan nodded his head and brought Jian Wushuang to the place of inheritance. After Jian Wushuang had left, Jiu Mai, please tell us what exactly happened in the 7th level. King Jiu looked toward Jiu Mai. I am also very curious. King Jiu Tong also wore an interested expression. King Jiu Tong, and everyone else present. Firstly, I have to say that my ancient god shadow did not hold back in the 7th level of the Star Moon Tower and it displayed abilities that were in accordance with the standards of the Star Moon Tower, Jiu Mai said. After Jian Wushuang became a 6-star ancient god, his abilities were indeed very powerful and he could rival a stage 3 6-star ancient god. However, when he was fighting an intense battle against my ancient god shadow, he was completely suppressed. At the start, it was extremely one-sided and I even thought that there was no doubt that he would die. However, in the blink of an eye, his abilities skyrocketed abruptly. If I'm not wrong, he has unleashed a very special secret skill which allows his power to achieve a completely new level which might even be above mine. Moreover, after unleashing his secret skill, neither did he waste any time on me nor compete with me in terms of close-quarters combat skills. Instead, he only unleashed unique skills and secret skills to compete with me in terms of power. Even though it was purely a head-on clash of attacks, I was not his opponent and I was defeated. That's it? The top experts present all looked at one another. Among them, a red-haired, tall old man said, 2,000 years ago when he challenged the 6th level of the Star Moon Tower which was guarded by me, he was not my opponent at the start as well. However, all of a sudden, his abilities skyrocketed and the power he unleashed was way greater than mine. Thus, I was defeated. It seems like he had used that secret skill as well. As soon as his words left his mouth, many experts present understood. This little kid actually possesses that kind of secret skill. No wonder he is so confident. King Jiuyi laughed apathetically. Ancient God Palace. Under the guidance of Ling Shan, Jian Wushuang came in front of the 3 black ancient attics again. Out of the 3 attics, Jian Wushuang had already gone into 2 of them and inherited the thunder attracting skill, as well the star destruction skill. At that very moment, he was only left with the final attic. You may go in now. The rules are the same, you only have 10 years' time, Ling Shan said. Understood. Jian Wushuang nodded his head. Without hesitation, he stepped into the palace. When he entered the palace, the first thing he saw was still the 1,000,000-foot-tall ancient god shadow, which was at the end of his line of vision. The moon-picking skill is the most powerful and mysterious skill of the ancient god clan's 3 secret skills. Hence, I wonder how impressive this secret skill is. Filled with a bit of excitement, Jian Wushuang sat down with his legs crossed immediately. Let's begin. Jian Wushuang closed his eyes. In no time, memories of inheritance flowed into him. Jian Wushuang also did his very best to absorb the memories of inheritance. However, all of a sudden, Jian Wushuang's expression changed fiercely. The moon-picking skill is actually a space-time type secret skill. Jian Wushuang was surprised. It should be known that what he had comprehended was the space-time doctrine. Hence, his ability to detect the power of space-time was naturally high. As he absorbed the memories of inheritance, he could feel clearly that the moon-picking skill involved power of space-time. The moon-picking skill was an extremely advanced and frightening space-time type secret skill. Hence, it could be said to be a remarkable ability. However, it was unusual that such a secret skill did not require one to comprehend the power of space-time at all. Instead, one only required a great amount of ancient god power to use it. How exquisite! As Jian Wushuang muttered to himself, his consciousness could not help but enter a state of comprehension. As he absorbed the memories of inheritance, he also used them to learn the secret skill and, from there, he comprehended the space-time doctrine as well. After all, such an advanced space-time secret skill would involve an extremely huge amount of power of space-time. Moreover, these were all things that Jian Wushuang could comprehend. Time passed by. In a flash, 10 years had passed. The inheritance of the moon-picking skill had come to an end. As for Jian Wushuang, not only did he learn the complete method to use the moon-picking skill, his level of comprehension of the space-time doctrine had also increased greatly. If I'm not wrong, my comprehension of the space-time doctrine has already achieved the standards needed to clear the 4th level of the Doctrine Palace, Jian Wushuang giggled. Chapter 1642. Returning to Thunderbolt Island originally, Jian Wushuang had only wanted to inherit the moon-picking skill fully. However, during the process of inheriting it, his level of comprehension of the space-time doctrine had also increased greatly, and it could be said to be an unexpected gain. I have already obtained the ancient god clan's 4 unique skills and 3 secret skills. Moreover, I have also made a breakthrough to real God. Thus, I have achieved all my objectives for coming to the ancient god sanctuary, and it's about time for me to leave. Jian Wushuang stood up as he laughed. Although he possessed the bloodline of an ancient god and a human being at the same time, he had been living in human territories ever since he was young. Hence, he naturally had a greater sense of belonging in human territories. For his trip to the ancient god sanctuary, it was merely for the unique skills and secret skills. Since he had achieved his objectives, he naturally had to leave. After walking out of the Palace of Inheritance, Jian Wushuang bid farewell to King Jiyu Tong, King Jiyu, and the rest of the people he was familiar with. After finding out that Jian Wushuang was about to leave, King Jiyu Tong, King Jiyu, and the rest of the people who he was familiar with were not surprised. In no time, Jian Wushuang settled everything that he needed to settle in the lineage of ancient gods. After that, he left the ancient god sanctuary and headed to the human territories. Hall Master Yuan, I have already left the ancient god sanctuary. Also, I have made a breakthrough to real God. Jian Wushuang informed Hall Master Yuan of what had happened. You made a breakthrough already? So quickly? Hall Master Yuan was surprised at first. After that, he became delighted. That's great. Jian Wushuang, now, do you plan to return to the lineage of Star or go to the Thunderbolt Island? I should be going to the Thunderbolt Island, Jian Wushuang said. As he had just made a breakthrough, his abilities were in the eruption stage. Thus, he would benefit greatly if he were to go to the Thunderbolt Island to train at this stage. Since that's the case, please be careful during your journey, Hall Master Yuan warned. Understood. Jian Wushuang nodded his head. A huge amount of time was required to return to the Thunderbolt Island from the ancient God Island. However, the good thing was that after coming out of the ancient God Sanctuary, no one had their eyes on him. As such, his journey was quite a smooth one. Thunderbolt Island, the Sanctuary Alliance's base. After returning to the Thunderbolt Island, Jian Wushuang went to the Fairy Palace immediately. Old Snake. Jian Wushuang was standing in front of a black-skinned old man who was wearing a simple hemp garment. The black-skinned old man was called Old Snake, the person in charge of the Fairy Palace. Jian Wushuang? I have not seen you for some time. Oh, you have made a breakthrough to real God? Old Snake was looking at Jian Wushuang and he could tell with a glance that Jian Wushuang had made a breakthrough to real God. I am lucky to have made a breakthrough, Jian Wushuang laughed. An inverse cultivator at the level of a real God. Although you have just made a breakthrough, from the looks of it, the Sanctuary Alliance will have an additional top expert who is able to compete against the Almighty soon. Old Snake chuckled. This time around, you wish to enter the Fairy Palace, right? Reincarnation Fairy Palace and Space-Time Fairy Palace. How many years do you wish to comprehend inside either of them for? There is still 40 years of training time remaining in each of the 2 tokens of the Fairy Palace's legacy that I have, so I shall use up all of them, Jian Wushuang said. In the past, he would go to the Fairy Palace to comprehend every few years and he would comprehend for 10 years every time. However, at that moment, he had just made a breakthrough in his realm. Hence, the longer he could stay in the Fairy Palace to comprehend, the better it would be. The old snake waved his hands toward Jian Wushuang's 2 tokens of the Fairy Palace's legacy. You may go in. Jian Wushuang entered the Reincarnation Fairy Palace first. In a vast, starlit sky, there was a total of 27 picture scrolls which were filled with secrets. Among the 27 picture scrolls, Jian Wushuang had finished comprehending the 10th picture scroll previously. However, when he was merely a universe god back then, his abilities had achieved the maximum possible level and he was unable to raise them any further. Thus, his level of comprehension of the power of Heaven Wei had naturally stagnated. As such, he could only stop comprehending. However, at that very moment, it was different. In the realm of real gods, there were no limits to the abilities one could have. For example, if a void real god were extremely talented and also had great opportunities, his comprehension of the Heaven Way could absolutely achieve the standards to clear the 5th level, or even the 6th level, of the Doctrine Palace. Of course, there would not be any normal void real god who could achieve that stage. After all, if his comprehension of the Heaven Way had already achieved such a stage, he would have been able to make a breakthrough to eternal real God a long time ago. Let's begin. Jian Wushuang started to comprehend immediately. As Jian Wushuang comprehended, he realized that after making a breakthrough to real God, his ability to sense the power of Heaven Wei had risen greatly. When he was only a universe god back then, with the aid of the 27 picture scrolls in the Reincarnation Fairy Palace as well as the wonderful guidance from the Fairy Palace, his comprehension speed was already extremely shocking. At that moment, he had become a real god. Thus, his comprehension speed had become many times faster as compared to before. It's too fast. This comprehension speed is too fast. Jian Wushuang clenched both his fists tightly and he was extremely delighted. With such a shocking comprehension speed, in just 2 years' time, Jian Wushuang comprehended the 11th picture scroll completely. After that, he used another 7 years' time to fully comprehend the 12th picture scroll. After comprehending the 12th picture scroll fully, it meant that Jian Wushuang's comprehension of the reincarnation doctrine had achieved the standards needed to clear the 4th level of the Doctrine Palace. Moreover, he was still left with 31 years of time. Continue. Jian Wushuang suppressed his happiness and continued to comprehend. However, the power of Heaven Wei would become more complicated the more one comprehended it. As such, it would naturally become more difficult to comprehend. It was still all right for the first 12 picture scrolls. However, when Jian Wushuang reached the 13th picture scroll, his comprehension speed was obviously slower. In the blink of an eye, 40 years had passed and Jian Wushuang could only leave the Reincarnation Fairy Palace. During the 40 years, of the 27 picture scrolls in the Reincarnation Fairy Palace, I fully comprehended the 13th picture scroll and I'm even close to 90% of the 14th picture scroll. This is already considered not too bad. Jian Wushuang was satisfied. After all, if he were to rely on his own abilities to train, it would be unknown as to how many years it would take for him to achieve such a level in his comprehension of the reincarnation doctrine. However, the reincarnation doctrine served as his shortcut and he only spent a short 40 years. Next, it's time for the Space-Time Fairy Palace. While wearing a smile, Jian Wushuang entered the Space-Time Fairy Palace immediately. Similarly, he could comprehend for 40 years in the Space-Time Fairy Palace. Moreover, his comprehension of the space-time doctrine was at a higher level than the reincarnation doctrine and it could already clear the 4th level of the Doctrine Palace a long time ago. For the 40 years, Jian Wushuang comprehended thoroughly. After 40 years, of the 27 picture scrolls in the Space-Time Fairy Palace, he had fully comprehended the first 14 picture scrolls and he was also about to be done with the 15th picture scroll. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more and I will be able to comprehend the 15th picture scroll fully. When Jian Wushuang walked out of the Space-Time Fairy Palace, he was a bit dissatisfied. He felt that if he were to stay in the space-time doctrine for another short period of time, maybe about 4 to 5 years, he would be able to comprehend the 15th picture scroll fully. It should be known that as long as he comprehended the 15th picture scroll fully, he would be able to clear the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace. By clearing the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace, he would be able to obtain the right to stay in Thunderbolt Island permanently. Moreover, this was something that many chaotic real gods were unable to achieve. In addition, there would also be a very huge meaning in Jian Wushuang clearing the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace using his space-time doctrine. Chapter 1643. Just a little bit more at its highest level, I can unleash thousands upon thousands of shadows when I use my martial art motion, Flowing Light Phantom. Moreover, there is a very high requirement in terms of the level of comprehension of the space-time doctrine in order to achieve such a level. To achieve such a level, the minimum requirement is to be able to clear the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace. In other words, as long as I can comprehend the 15th picture scroll in the space-time fairy palace completely, I can unleash the power of Flowing Light Phantom when it is at its highest possible realm. By then, my ability to stay alive will rise exponentially. Jian Wushuang was clenching both his fists tightly. The creator of the secret skill Flowing Light Phantom is an extremely powerful chaotic real god. In spite of that, the chaotic real god's level of comprehension of the space-time doctrine was only at the level that was enough to clear the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace. However, during his generation, when he used his martial art motion, he was recognized as the #1 among the real gods in terms of martial art motion. From this, it could be seen how impressive his martial art motion was. Thus, if Jian Wushuang's level of comprehension were to achieve that level where he was able to unleash the Flowing Light Phantom's power at its final stage, his martial art motion still might not be recognized as the #1 among real gods. However, he would rank at least 10th among the real gods. With that, not only would his abilities rise greatly, most importantly, his ability to stay alive would be greater as well. It was a pity that after comprehending in the space-time fairy palace for 40 years, he was still a very small step away from comprehending the 15th picture scroll fully. No matter what, I have to be able to unleash the power of the final stage of the Flowing Light Phantom secret skill. Hence, I have to think of a way to enter the space-time fairy palace again to train for a period of time. As for the way, Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes slightly. There was still a long time before the Sanctuary Alliance would give out the token of the Fairy Palace's legacy again. Moreover, Jian Wushuang definitely could not afford to wait. It was also impossible for the lineage of Star to help him get another token of the Fairy Palace's legacy. Since that was the case, he could only rely on himself. With his abilities, there was only one way for him to obtain comprehension time in the Fairy Palace. Betting on a match. Thunderbolt Island. Fighting space. When Jian Wushuang came to the fighting space, the two experts who were fighting an intense battle had just completed their battle. Real God Mo Qian, thank you for letting me win, the voice of an old man with fluttering white hair resounded across the area. You are merely lucky. After giving a cold hum, Mo Qian left straight away. As for Jian Wushuang, he stepped into the fighting space immediately. The old man with fluttering white hair saw the arrival of Jian Wushuang. After that, his expression changed and he laughed. Jian Wushuang, could it be that you wish to duel with me as well? I have come to bet on a match. Jian Wushuang came in front of the old man with fluttering white hair. What do you wish to bet? The old man with fluttering white hair asked. I still have more than 1,000 years of training time in the Thunderbolt Island. Hence, I will use my 1,000 years of training time, as well as 100 doctrine gems, as my stakes. As for what I want, it is 10 years of training time in the Fairy Palace, Jian Wushuang said. As soon as his words left his mouth, the old man with fluttering white hair was shocked. 1,000 years of training time in the Thunderbolt Island was considered nothing. As long as one was an eternal real god, he would be able to train in the Thunderbolt Island for 3,000 years every 100,000 years. Thus, the training time in the Thunderbolt Island was not considered very precious. However, 100 doctrine gems were worth quite a lot. After all, by adding all the treasures and belongings of a normal eternal real god, they only amounted to about 10 to 20 doctrine gems. Under normal circumstances, 100 doctrine gems could represent all the treasures and belongings of a top eternal real god. As Jian Wushuang had killed tens of real gods in one go in the Burning Demon region back then, and he had obtained many treasures. By adding real god Shiju's treasures and belongings on top of that, he could fork out 100 doctrine gems. However, that was the best that he could do. Your stakes are very attractive. However, it's a pity that I do not even have a token of the Fairy Palace's legacy and hence training time in the Fairy Palace. Therefore, I am unable to give you what you want. The old man with fluttering white hair waved his hands and was about to leave. Access web novel live if you like watching manga comics. Jian Wushuang did not stop him. Instead, his eyes looked around the surrounding and he said heartily, everyone present here, if any one of you is able to fork out 10 years of training time in the Fairy Palace, please step forward. After talking, Jian Wushuang stayed within the fighting space and closed his eyes. It was obvious that he planned to wait for someone to bet a match with him. The stakes that he had proposed were indeed attractive and he believed that a number of people would be interested. As expected, after a number of real gods in the fighting space heard Jian Wushuang's words, they became restless. 100 doctrine gems. This Jian Wushuang is really rich and arrogant. Of course. He is the apple of the lineage of Star's Eye. What a pity. What he wants is training time in the Fairy Palace. Although there are many experts in the Thunderbolt Island, there are not many people with a token of the Fairy Palace's legacy. At the very least, I do not have it. A number of real gods felt that it was a pity. Although they were interested in Jian Wushuang's stakes and were confident that they possessed the abilities to defeat Jian Wushuang, they did not possess the item that Jian Wushuang wanted. However, although they did not have it, they informed some experts who possessed training time in the Fairy Palace at once. In the Thunderbolt Island, there were special secret patterns carved on the roof of an exquisite attic. At that very moment, there was a purple-armored handsome man sitting down with his legs crossed over there. The handsome man was real god Qian Ming of the Four-Symbol Mansion. Real god Qian Ming's expression changed and he opened his eyes. Jian Wushuang is betting on a match. The stakes are 1,000 years of training time in the Thunderbolt Island as well as 100 doctrine gems and he only wants 10 years of training time in the Fairy Palace. He offered 100 doctrine gems right away. This Jian Wushuang is really liberal with his wealth. Real god Qian Ming was muttering to himself. At the next moment, he got up and headed to the fighting space. As soon as he arrived at the wrestling ring that the fighting space was at, real god Qian Ming saw many other real gods who had arrived as well. There were many real gods and they amounted to close to 100. Moreover, among those real gods, there were quite a number of them who real god Qian Ming recognized or were familiar with. Moreover, there were even a few genius experts who possessed the token of the Fairy Palace's legacy among them. This battle of Jian Wushuang has actually attracted so many people? Real god Qian Ming raised his eyebrows. However, he calmed down in no time. He knew that Jian Wushuang was not betting on a match with a specific person. Instead, he stood at the fighting space and declared that he would fight with anyone who could fork out 10 years of training time in the Fairy Palace. This was challenging the huge number of real gods in the Thunderbolt Island. In addition, Jian Wushuang was an inverse cultivator and he was already extremely special to begin with. As such, When the news spread, it naturally attracted many experts. Chen Yu, real god Qian Ming spoke. Qian Ming, you have come as well. A void real god turned his head over. How has it been? Is there anyone who has fought with Jian Wushuang? Real god Qian Ming questioned. Not at the moment. Real god Chen Yu shook his head. Jian Wushuang wants training time in the fairy palace. However, there are not many people who have the token of the fairy palace's legacy among the people present. Although I have a token of the fairy palace's legacy, I heard that Jian Wushuang has defeated you before. Chapter 1644. Real God Xian Feng. He has indeed defeated me before, real god Qian Ming admitted right away. There you have it. Since you are also not his opponent, if I were to bet a match with him, wouldn't I be making myself embarrassed? Moreover, I do not have much training time left in the fairy palace. Real god Chen Yu forced a smile. After that, he asked immediately, for you to come again now, could it be that you wish to have a battle with Jian Wushuang again? Real god Qian Ming shook his head. Jian Wushuang's level of comprehension of the power of Heaven Wei is extremely high. Although I have improved during the past 2,000 years, he must have improved a lot as well. Hence, I am not confident that I can defeat him. Let us observe the situation first. Yes, you're right. Real god Chen Yu nodded his head. At that moment, swoosh! A figure entered the fighting space, and this attracted the attention of many experts in the wrestling ring. It's real god Xian Feng. Chen Yu was shocked. It's him? Real god Qian Ming's eyes squinted. Most of the people in the Thunderbolt Island were eternal real gods. Although there were also a few void real gods, there were very few of them. Among the void real gods on the Thunderbolt Island, real god Qian Ming was considered one of the top gods. However, there were also void real gods who were stronger than him, and one of them was naturally the Monster King. The Monster King of the Soaring Heaven King Palace had been recognized as the #1 among the void real gods. Thus, real god Qian Ming's abilities were naturally incomparable to the Monster King's. Apart from the Monster King, the only other void real god in Thunderbolt Island who had made him extremely fearful was real god Xian Feng. Within the fighting space, real god Xian Feng had already appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. 1,000 years of training time in the Thunderbolt Island, as well as 100 doctrine gems. Real god Xian Feng was looking at Jian Wushuang. That's right. Jian Wushuang nodded his head. All right. I have 10 years of training time in the fairy palace. Let's get started. Real god Xian Feng had a cold expression, and his hands were already holding his purple saber. As you wish. Jian Wushuang laughed, and the Blood Mountain sword had already appeared in his hands. After that, swoosh! Jian Wushuang's body moved straight away. He did not use his martial art motion. Instead, he only relied on his own speed as well as his comprehension of the space-time doctrine. However, the speed that he unleashed in an instant caused many real gods outside the fighting space to open their eyes wide. This speed? Real god Xian Feng was shocked as well. The 4th level? His comprehension of the space-time doctrine has definitely achieved the standard needed to clear the 4th level. Real god Xian Feng's expression turned ugly at once. He knew that Jian Wushuang had defeated real god Qian Ming before 2,000 years ago. Moreover, with Jian Wushuang's talents, his abilities would definitely be stronger after 2,000 years. However, he did not expect Jian Wushuang's comprehension of the space-time doctrine to be able to achieve the standard needed to clear the 4th level of the Doctrine Palace in just a short 2,000 years. After all, it would be more difficult to comprehend the power of Heaven Wei the more one comprehended it. The 4th level of the Doctrine Palace was equivalent to the standard of a chaotic real god, and it would not be easy to achieve it. For example, a top genius like him had been stuck at the 3rd level for a very long period of time, and he had been unable to achieve the 4th level. However, Jian Wushuang had actually managed to achieve the 4th level so easily. Damn it! Real god Xian Feng gave a cry. When he saw Jian Wushuang's body appearing in front of him, he became vigilant immediately and also held his saber tighter. Swish! Jian Wushuang attacked with his sword straight away. Under the influence of the power of space-time, the stroke was so fast that even the naked eyes of a void real god were unable to capture it. Real god Xian Feng also swung his saber to block the attack immediately. Clang! 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 The both of them fought instantly. Moreover, the battle entered the climax as soon as they fought. If you like reading comics, please visit Webnovel Live. As for the experts outside the fighting space, they could tell with a glance that the battle was completely one-sided. Real god Xianxia had also comprehended two doctrines at the same time. Moreover, both his doctrines had achieved the peak of the third level and they were very close to the fourth level. However, even though he was only one small step away, the gap between the power levels was so great that it was shocking. Jian Wushuang did not even need to use his reincarnation doctrine. He relied purely on his comprehension of the space-time doctrine, as well as his own sword principles. Moreover, he did not even unleash his power of space-time fully. However, even with all that, he still managed to completely suppress real god Xianxia. It's too fast. His speed is really too fast. Can't last any longer. I can't last any longer. Real god Xianxia was roaring in his mind. Although he did his best to block the attacks and had also used all his tricks, he had only lasted for a short period of time against Jian Wushuang's attacks and he was defeated in the end. The fighting space had already quieted down completely. Jian Wushuang still stood in his own position and he was putting the Blood Mountain sword on his hands back into his scabbard slowly. In front of him, real god Xianxia was staring at him with an extremely grave expression. Thank you for letting me win, Jian Wushuang chuckled. As expected of an inverse cultivator. Although you have only just become a real god, your comprehension of the space-time doctrine has already achieved the standard needed to clear the fourth level of the Doctrine Palace. You are indeed impressive and I accept my defeat, real god Xianxia said with a low voice. After that, he took out a token of the Fairy Palace's legacy, gave Jian Wushuang 10 years of training time and left. Outside the fighting space, real god Qian Ming and real god Chen Yu was together. Even real god Xianxia has been defeated. This Jian Wushuang is very strong. Real god Chen Yu exclaimed in admiration. He has already made a breakthrough to real god. Moreover, his comprehension of the space-time doctrine has already achieved the standard needed to clear the fourth level of the Doctrine Palace. Hence, it's normal for real god Xianxia to not be his opponent, real god Qian Ming said. Fourth level of the Doctrine Palace. That is the standard of a chaotic real god's comprehension. Since Jian Wushuang is so strong, who would still dare to have a match with him? Real god Chen Yu said. Of course there is someone who would dare to bet a match with him. Real god Qian Ming's eyes turned cold. Qian Ming, you are referring to. Real god Chen Yu looked toward real god Qian Ming. There's no rush. I have already sent a message to get him to come here. Real god Qian Ming laughed coldly. In no time, a figure appeared within the wrestling ring. When that person appeared, many real gods in the wrestling ring looked over immediately. The Monster King. Everyone's eyes turned grave. Even though quite a number of people present were eternal real gods and the person who came was merely a void real god, no one dared to underestimate him. After all, he was Monster King, the number one among the void real gods. Xianxia, even you were defeated? The Monster King was still gloomy and evil like before. I was defeated. There's indeed quite a large gap in our abilities, real god Xianxia admitted magnanimously. This will be interesting, the Monster King grinned. However, his eyes turned hazy. Back then, Jian Wushuang left the Thunderbolt Island and it is unknown as to where he went. Moreover, he left for 2,000 years and when he returned, he had actually made a breakthrough to real god already. Monster King, are you here for Jian Wushuang as well? Real god Xianxia looked toward the Monster King. Ha ha. This Jian Wushuang is an inverse cultivator. Although I have defeated him in the past, he was merely a universe god that time. But now, I wish to see how strong he is after making a breakthrough to real god, the Monster King laughed nonchalantly. Then you had better be careful and not be careless. If not, you will have to give away your position as the number one of the void real god Xianxia said. Chapter 1645. Fighting the Monster King again. Haha. My first position is not something that be taken away from me easily. Even an inverse cultivator like him will not be able to do it. The Monster King laughed gloomily and he entered the fighting space instantly. The Monster King has gone in. This is going to be interesting. No wonder how strong Jian Wushuang is. He is still slightly inferior compared to the Monster King. Many real gods within the wrestling ring were chatting with one another. Within the fighting space, the Monster King had already come in front of Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang, do you have the guts to fight me next? The Monster King laughed evilly. Why not? Jian Wushuang was not afraid in the slightest. Great. When you bet a match with me back then, our stakes were 20 years of training time. Should it be the same this time round? The Monster King said. I only have 10 years of training time in the Fairy Palace. For the remaining 10 years, I will offer you 1,000 years of training time in the Thunderbolt Island, as well as 100 Doctrine Gems as replacement, Jian Wushuang said. No problem, the Monster King nodded his head. I heard that you defeated real god Xianxia with your spacetime doctrine. From this, it means that your level of comprehension of the spacetime doctrine has already reached the level necessary to clear the 4th level of the Doctrine Palace? That's right, Jian Wushuang admitted. Read more chapter on Vipnovel. You also know that what I'm most proficient in is the spacetime doctrine. Since that is the case, let's see whose level of comprehension is higher. The Monster King laughed strangely and his body flashed abruptly. With the flash, he had already disappeared. Swoosh! The void behind Jian Wushuang was broken open and the Monster King stepped out of it. The gloomy, cold dagger in his hands then headed toward Jian Wushuang's head. When Jian Wushuang had fought with the Monster King 2,000 years ago, the Monster King had used the same attack and Jian Wushuang was unable to block it. However, this time round, swish! The pitch-black dagger, which was emitting an infinite amount of gloom and a cold aura, pierced through Jian Wushuang's head directly. However, no blood was seen. A fragmentary shadow? The Monster King raised his eyebrows. I will not fall for the same move twice. Moreover, I will not be defeated by the same opponent twice. Jian Wushuang's ice-cold voice could be heard from a void by the side. At the same time, an ice-cold sword shadow had already cut open the void and was heading toward the Monster King. The Monster King moved sideways and the sword shadow brushed past his body. However, at that very moment, Jian Wushuang dashed forward fiercely. Boom! His speed, that had caused even real god Xianxia to tremble with fear, was unleashed. Ha ha! I really want to see whose speed is faster. The Monster King grinned hideously and his body moved as well. Swoosh! 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 The two shadows were shuttling back and forth within the fighting space. While they were moving, they also left behind strange fragmentary shadows which caused everyone to be dazzled. Outside the fighting space. So fast. Both of their speeds are fast. Where are the both of them? Many real gods were watching with great concentration. However, all of a sudden, a thunder-like sound could be heard and those real gods looked toward the source of the sound immediately. However, they only saw that a part of the void that had burst apart completely. Moreover, even though that part of the void had just burst apart, another part of the void which was 1,000 miles away had twisted open as well. At the same time, a sword shadow appeared and split the universe into two halves. Another explosive sound could be heard. However, this time around, the sound came from the edge of the fighting space. Speed. This was a duel in terms of speed. Ha ha. Jian Wushuang, after not seeing you for 2,000 years, your level of comprehension of the spacetime doctrine has indeed risen by quite a lot. However, it's a pity that this kind of speed is still not enough. The Monster King's voice could be heard. However, the people outside the fighting space had absolutely no idea where the Monster King was. Is that so? Jian Wushuang grinned. He then stopped hiding his power of spacetime and unleashed it completely. It should be known that the power of spacetime that Jian Wushuang had unleashed from the start until then was only at the standard that had just cleared the 4th level of the Doctrine Palace. However, at that very moment, he had gone all out with his power of spacetime, which was already extremely near to clearing the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace. Boom! Jian Wushuang moved around crazily like a shooting star and his speed was at least 3 times faster than before. What? The Monster King's expression changed slightly. His eyes then turned grave straight away as he realized that the speed that Jian Wushuang had just displayed was actually slightly faster than him. Puff! Jian Wushuang's body appeared and he swung the Blood Mountain sword on his hand straight away. Swish! 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 A total of 10 strokes were swung out in an instant. Every stroke was so fast that it was unbelievable, and they were just like shooting stars. The Monster King's eyes turned cold. At the next moment, a great amount of purple thunderbolts rose from his body and spread across the surrounding with a shocking speed. The purple thunderbolts contained extremely violent power. In just an instant, they had covered the whole fighting space and changed it into a vast purple thunder pond. As for the dagger on the Monster King's hands, it was accumulating a great amount of thunderbolt power. He then attacked with the dagger. Clang! 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 Many loud sounds could be heard. The Monster King had already unleashed his full power, however, after tens of clashes, his body could no longer take it and he was sent flying by the impact. How is this possible? The Monster King's face was filled with fear. I actually lost in a clash of power? The Monster King was totally unable to believe what had happened. He had comprehended two heaven ways at the same time, namely the space-time doctrine and the sacred thunder doctrine. Moreover, the sacred thunder doctrine was the same as the extermination doctrine of the Supreme Four doctrine, which focused mainly on attack power. His comprehension of the sacred thunder doctrine had already achieved the standards to clear the fourth level of the Doctrine Palace as well. Under such circumstances, when his attack, which contained the full power of the sacred thunder doctrine, clashed with Jian Wushuang's sword principles, the end result was actually him being sent flying. This is the Thunderbolt Island, and our divine power is the same. Even if he is an inverse cultivator, he should only be able to unleash the divine power at the level of a normal void real god as well. However, in a head-on clash in terms of power, he actually pushed me back? Could it be? His comprehension of the reincarnation doctrine has also achieved the standard necessary to clear the fourth level of the Doctrine Palace, and it might even be at a higher level? As the Monster King thought about that, his whole face was filled with astonishment. He knew that Jian Wushuang had comprehended the space-time doctrine and reincarnation doctrine at the same time. In terms of power, the reincarnation doctrine was slightly inferior to the extermination doctrine and the sacred thunder doctrine, whose main focuses were on attack power. However, Jian Wushuang had still sent him flying, and this could only mean that Jian Wushuang's level of comprehension of the reincarnation doctrine was higher than his level of comprehension of the sacred thunder doctrine. Since his speed is slightly faster than mine, his level of comprehension should be at a higher level than mine. But now, even his level of comprehension of the reincarnation doctrine is this high. The Monster King had already started to feel anxious. As for Jian Wushuang, he had already unleashed his speed completely, and he was using his sword principles repeatedly. With such speed, the Monster King could only rely on some of his own techniques to sustain himself with difficulty. He even relied on his comprehension of the space-time doctrine to shuttle back and forth within the fighting space. With this, he avoided Jian Wushuang completely, and it was obvious that he wanted to play hide-and-seek with Jian Wushuang. He would hide, and Jian Wushuang would chase after him. Chapter 1646. The fifth level. This Monster King. Jian Wushuang held his sword with one hand, unleashed his speed and chased the Monster King continuously as he wanted to kill him. However, although the Monster King's speed was inferior to Jian Wushuang, he could still use the power of space-time to move around in the void to dodge the attack. Hence, Jian Wushuang was unable to do anything to him for a period of time. In no time, both their bodies stopped moving. Jian Wushuang, I admit that your current abilities are not weaker than mine. Thus, it's pointless for us to continue fighting as we will not reach an outcome. As such, let us call it a day here, the Monster King said. Call it a day. You wish. Jian Wushuang laughed coldly. Do you think that by relying on some of the different ways of using the power of space-time to avoid fighting with me head-on, I would be unable to do anything to you? Don't forget that I have yet to use my martial art motion at all. Martial art motion? The Monster King was shocked. He remembered at once that back then, when Jian Wushuang had fought with him, he had unleashed a martial art motion. Moreover, that martial art motion was extremely strange, and it could create hundreds of shadows at the same time. At that very moment, when Jian Wushuang fought with him, he had indeed not used it yet. Monster King, just admit your defeat earnestly. Jian Wushuang's voice reverberated through the area. When his body moved fiercely, close to 100 shadows appeared immediately. Similarly, there were close to 100 shadows. However, when Jian Wushuang unleashed that move at that very moment, it was completely different from before. Previously, his comprehension of the space-time doctrine had only had the right to clear the third level of the Doctrine Palace. However, at that moment, he was extremely close to the fifth level. Furthermore, that martial art motion secret skill of his was closely linked to his comprehension of the space-time doctrine. Many shadows could be seen moving around in the void, and their speeds were extremely fast. Just like before, the Monster King wanted to rely on his power of space-time to deal with Jian Wushuang. However, this time around, puff. A sword light appeared beside the Monster King straight away, and there was no way for him to dodge the attack. Therefore, he could only choose to fight with Jian Wushuang head-on. However, as soon as he clashed with Jian Wushuang head-on, he would definitely be completely suppressed. Damn it! The Monster King gritted his teeth, and he had an extremely ugly expression. However, his situation became worse by the second, and finally, Jian Wushuang's sword struck his head. Buzz the fighting space quietened down. Monster King, thank you very much for your 20 years of training time. Jian Wushuang laughed indifferently. The Monster King had a gloomy expression. At the same time, his eyes were glowing with a cold light, and he was filled with dissatisfaction. However, no matter how dissatisfied he was, with so many people looking at the fighting space, he could not go back on his words. Hence, he could only give 20 years of training time to Jian Wushuang earnestly. After that, he gave a cold hum and left. 30 years of training time. As Jian Wushuang looked at the extra numbers on his own token of the Fairy Palace's legacy, he revealed a smile. For the space-time doctrine, he was already extremely close to clearing the fifth level of the Doctrine Palace, and he was confident that he could achieve the standard needed to clear it in 10 years' time. However, at that moment, he had a total of 30 years. This is more than enough, and there is no need for me to continue betting on matches. You're listening to this story from PandaAudioBooks. If you enjoy these stories and would like to support my work, feel free to buy me a coffee via PayPal. Link in the description below. Jian Wushuang moved his body and headed outside the fighting space immediately. As soon as he walked out of the fighting space, he realized that many eyes were looking at him at once. Those eyes were filled with admiration. This Jian Wushuang has actually defeated the Monster King? He is the person recognized as the #1 among the Void Real Gods. Moreover, he has only just made a breakthrough to Real God, and it is obvious that there is still huge room for his abilities to improve. It is really not possible to look at an inverse cultivator normally. Even though there were still voices discussing the matter, Jian Wushuang had already left. After leaving the fighting space, Jian Wushuang came before the Fairy Palace again. After that, he entered the space-time Fairy Palace straight away and began his comprehension. As per what Jian Wushuang expected, he managed to fully comprehend the 15th picture scroll within the space-time Fairy Palace in less than 10 years. With that, Jian Wushuang's level of comprehension of the space-time doctrine was high enough to clear the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace. By clearing the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace, one would possess the right to live in the Thunderbolt Island permanently. However, to achieve that, I would have to first challenge the Doctrine Palace for real. Jian Wushuang laughed. There's no rush. Let me first grasp the power of the final stage of the Flowing Light secret skill. Moreover, I also have one trump card that I have not touched for many years, and it's time for me to take a look at it. Within the Thunderbolt Island, there were many standalone spaces which were prepared to allow some experts to practice their secret skills. At that moment, within one of the standalone spaces which was in complete darkness, swoosh, 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 an uncountable number of shadows seemed to have flooded the whole standalone space. Moreover, those shadows were moving at high speed, and it was impossible for anyone to use their naked eyes to differentiate the real body which was hiding within the shadows. Puff! All of a sudden, the great number of shadows dissipated and only Jian Wushuang remained in the whole standalone space. After my comprehension of the space-time doctrine has achieved the standard needed to clear the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace, I can indeed unleash the power of the final stage of the Flowing Light Phantom. However, I have only just entered the 5th level, and it is still a bit difficult for me to unleash it. Compared to the real God who created this martial art motion, I am probably still very far away. However, when my comprehension of the space-time doctrine reaches the peak of the 5th level, where it is extremely close to the 6th level, I should be comparable to that real God, Jian Wushuang muttered. After having a good grasp of the martial art motion, Jian Wushuang flipped his hands and took out an item. What Jian Wushuang took out was a normal picture scroll that did not seem unusual when seen with naked eyes. The picture scroll was also slightly yellowish in color. For such a kind of picture scroll, even if it were thrown onto the streets, no one would bend down and pick it up. However, Jian Wushuang was certain that such a normal picture scroll was worth so much that countless experts would fight for it madly. It was because of that fact that it was a chaos divine treasure, mountain river map. Jian Wushuang's eyes were glowing brilliantly and he was looking at the ancient picture scroll which was floating in front of him. The picture scroll was given to him by a master. Moreover, it had also been with him for many years. However, during those years, Jian Wushuang had only used the picture scroll once. That time, he had to rely on swallowing the blood that King Luozhan left behind forcefully to unleash the techniques of the picture scroll with difficulty. It was just that one time. As for his master Xianxia using the mountain river map to refine the grand formation of the enduring samsara later on, that was his master's technique and it was unrelated to him. There was no choice. The picture scroll's level was too high. Hence, Jian Wushuang absolutely did not have the right to use its power with his abilities. He had never possessed the ability. In other words, although he had an unbelievable treasure, he could only leave it lying in his Qian Kuan ring as he was unable to use it. That had always been the case. However, at that moment, it was different. The mountain river map is a valuable treasure that is at the level of a chaos divine treasure. Under normal circumstances, only almighties will be able to unleash the full power of a chaos divine treasure. However, for the current me, I do not need to unleash its full power. It will be enough as long as I am able to unleash a portion of its power. Jian Wushuang clenched both his fists tightly. Chapter 1647, Sanctuary Mountain as a Chaos Divine Treasure. The mountain river map had a high requirement of divine power. A normal real god would be unable to use such a treasure. As an inverse cultivator, Jian Wushuang possessed the ultimate divine power, which was not weaker than a chaotic real god's divine power. Hence, he could barely use the treasure. The most frightening thing of the mountain river map were the 9 continents that it contained. The 9 continents would change into an earth-shaking 9-province seal. The 9-province seal contained a total of 9 moves. A long time ago, Jian Wushuang had grasped the first move. However, he lacked the divine power necessary to use it. At that very moment, as he possessed the necessary amount of divine power, he could naturally use it. Let's try it. Jian Wushuang attempted to use the first move at once. With a wave of his hand, the mountain river map blended into the surrounding void. Buzz, an unusual ray of light appeared, and the void, which was originally in complete darkness, started to change at once. Atop the void, a giant and exceptionally beautiful picture scroll world appeared slowly, and it spread all over the heaven like flowing water. The world contained mountains and rivers. The scenery was beautiful. The most attractive thing was naturally the 9 continents, which were spread all over 9 different corners. The mountains and rivers are as palms, and the 9 provinces as the seal. Jian Wushuang's eyes were glowing with a shrill light, and he shouted out those words with a pause in between each word. Every word contained a special magical power. At the same time, he released the divine power from his body crazily, and it entered the picture scroll world. In no time, one of the 9 continents became extremely lifelike and came out from the picture scroll world slowly. Rumble, the continent, descended completely. It then fell on its frightening weight. With that, the standalone void was torn open completely like paper. In the blink of an eye, the power dissipated and the standalone void quietened down. Only the exceptionally beautiful picture scroll world, which was flowing slowly in the heavens, remained. Jian Wushuang was sitting on the void and he drew a light breath. As expected of a chaos divine treasure. Although I can barely use it with my divine power, I can only unleash 40% of the power of the 9-province seal's first seal. As for my divine power, I have used more than 50% of it, Jian Wushuang gasped. He had only become an ultimate real god recently. Hence, his body only contained 1 ultimate divine power water droplet and he did not possess enough divine power. By using the eternal divine treasure forcefully, he would deplete a great amount of divine power. However, even though the rate of depletion was shocking, its power did not disappoint him. If I am not wrong, if I were to activate the mountain river map and use the first seal of the 9-province seal with my current divine power, its power would be enough to kill a normal chaotic real god easily. Moreover, even top experts from the chaotic real gods would be unable to block it. If I were to combine it with the secret skill of Star Palace, even if it were experts in the real god ranking list, probably not many of them would be able to block it. Moreover, even if they were able to block it, they would definitely end up in a bad state. In other words, I currently have two strongest trump cards. The first one is the secret skill of Star Palace, while the second one is this mountain river map. Moreover, if I were to come across a strong enemy who I cannot block at all, I could use these two trump cards at the same time. If I were to go up another stage and become a stage 2 ultimate real god, where my divine power is equivalent to that of a normal almighty, I should be able to unleash the full power of the 9 province seal's first move. Moreover, I might even be able to unleash the second move and third move of the 9 province seal. At that time, I will be able to unleash the true power of this chaos divine treasure. Jian Wushuang clenched both his fists tightly and his eyes were glowing brilliantly. Thunderbolt Island, Doctrine Palace. As the goal of the power of Heaven Wei's comprehension, the Doctrine Palace had always been lively as experts would come to challenge the Doctrine Palace from time to time. At that very moment, Jian Wushuang had also come before the Doctrine Palace. Lord Yuji, Jian Wushuang greeted a black-robed, middle-aged man who was in front of him. You are the lineage of Star's inverse cultivator, Jian Wushuang? The black-robed middle-aged man's voice was cold. Why, have you come to challenge the Doctrine Palace as well? I have come here to give it a try, Jian Wushuang laughed. How many levels do you wish to challenge? The black-robed, middle-aged man asked. I shall start from the 4th level. If it's possible, I also wish to clear the 5th level, Jian Wushuang said bluntly. Oh. Then I shall wait and see, the black-robed, middle-aged man raised his eyebrows. You may go in. Jian Wushuang walked toward the Doctrine Palace at once. Although there was only one Doctrine Palace, many people could challenge it at the same time. Jian Wushuang went straight to the 4th level of the Doctrine Palace. The 4th level was within a group of huge volcanoes and a red-armored shadow was standing on the sky above the group of volcanoes. The red-armored shadow looked toward Jian Wushuang. I can tell that you have been comprehending the reincarnation doctrine and space-time doctrine at the same time. Hence, you can choose to use either the reincarnation doctrine, space-time doctrine, or a combination of both to clear this level. I choose the space-time doctrine, Jian Wushuang laughed. Although he was comprehending 2 heaven ways, only his space-time doctrine could clear the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace. In a split second, Jian Wushuang fought with the red-armored shadow. As it was only the 4th level of the Doctrine Palace, Jian Wushuang cleared it easily without using a lot of energy. After that, he came to the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace. Outside the Doctrine Palace sat the black-robed, middle-aged man. He was the person in charge of the Doctrine Palace. Hence, he knew everything that was happening within the Doctrine Palace clearly. Yes. That Jian Wushuang has really cleared the 5th level? The black-robed middle-aged man was surprised. In the blink of an eye, Jian Wushuang walked out from the Doctrine Palace. Little kid, you are not too bad. Even though you have only become a real god recently, you have cleared the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace. Looking at these abilities of yours, there probably isn't a second void real god who is superior to you in the Sanctuary Alliance. The black-robed middle-aged man giggled. Since you have cleared the 5th level, according to the rules of the Thunderbolt Island, you now possess the right to stay in the Thunderbolt Island permanently, and I will let the person in charge of the Sanctuary Mountain know about this matter. Now, you can go to the Sanctuary Mountain and choose a place to build your own palace or cave. After hearing what was said, Jian Wushuang's eyes brightened up immediately. The right to stay in the Thunderbolt Island permanently was something that could make many eternal real gods, as well as a few chaotic real gods, extremely envious. Furthermore, at that very moment, Jian Wushuang possessed this right after having become a real god recently. Jian Wushuang headed to the Sanctuary Mountain right away. The Sanctuary Mountain was in the northern region of the Thunderbolt Island and it was extremely huge. Upon arriving at the Sanctuary Mountain, Jian Wushuang looked at the enormous mountain range in front of him. At the same time, he also saw many different kinds of palaces, caves, and courtyards on the mountain range, and there were many of them. Moreover, those structures and buildings were well distributed. Most of them were either at the foot of a mountain or halfway up a mountain. As for palaces at the top of the mountain, there were very few of them. The people living at the top of the mountains of the sanctuary mountain should be almighties. The foot of the mountains and halfway up the mountains should be places where real gods live. Jian Wushuang laughed nonchalantly, and in no time, he found a place. 1648 The right to stay permanently. This place it shall be. As Jian Wushuang looked at a spacious area which was halfway up a mountain, he waved his big hands immediately. With that, a great amount of divine power appeared. The divine power then turned into a black castle in the open area. By achieving abilities similar to Jian Wushuang, one would be able to use their divine power to create a palace or cave easily. However, as Jian Wushuang was creating his castle, he also attracted the attention of the masters of some palaces in his vicinity. Looks like I will have another new neighbor. I wonder who he is. A long-robed old man floated over, and in no time, he came to the void that Jian Wushuang was in. At the same time, he also saw Jian Wushuang. A void real god. The long-robed old man revealed a surprised expression right away. Although Jian Wushuang's divine power could rival that of a chaotic real gods, he was still a stage 1 real god in the end. Thus, the aura that he had released was only at the level of a void real god, and the long-robed old man could tell with a glance straight away. I am Jian Wushuang from the lineage of Star. Greetings to real god Wuxing, Jian Wushuang said modestly. Jian Wushuang? The inverse cultivator of the lineage of Star. The long-robed old man known as real god Wuxing opened his eyes wide. You are actually creating a palace in the sanctuary mountain. Could it be that you have already cleared the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace? I was just fortunate. Jian Wushuang chuckled. You have really cleared it? Real god Wuxing felt that it was unbelievable. He knew that Jian Wushuang had only cleared the inverse cultivation test for the 3rd heaven not too long ago. Moreover, after fighting with the experts of the 4-symbol mansion in the Burning Demon region, he became extremely famous, and even his identity as an inverse cultivator was exposed. However, the abilities that Jian Wushuang displayed during the battle in the Burning Demon region were merely that of a normal eternal real god. Similarly, his level of comprehension of the Heaven Way was not very high. Furthermore, how many years has it been since that battle? Not only had he made a breakthrough to real god, he had also cleared the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace. How shocking was his speed of improvement! Real god Wuxing, do you want to have a chat with me in my castle? Jian Wushuang questioned. It's fine. Real god Wuxing shook his head, and in the blink of an eye, he left. Not long after that, real god Wuxing spread the news of Jian Wushuang creating a castle in the Sanctuary Mountain, and that he had also cleared the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace. In no time, the whole Thunderbolt Island and even the whole Sanctuary Alliance was shocked. It must be known that up till the very moment, the Monster King, who was previously known as the #1 of the Void Real Gods, had only managed to clear the 4th level of the Doctrine Palace, even though he had been stuck in Void Real God for many years. What about Jian Wushuang? He had only made a breakthrough not too long ago, and there was still huge room for him to improve as a Void Real God. Not to mention that he would also become an Eternal Real God and Chaotic Real God in the future. Too fast. Jian Wushuang's speed of improvement is too fast. He has managed to clear the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace, even though he has only made a breakthrough to Real God not too long ago, and this is really frightening. Could this happen because of him being an inverse cultivator? No. Although inverse cultivators are frightening, they do not have much of an advantage in terms of comprehension of the power of Heaven Way. For Jian Wushuang to be able to clear the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace after making a breakthrough to Real God recently, it is completely thanks to his own power of comprehension, as well as his own talents. In other words, even if Jian Wushuang were not an inverse cultivator, he will still be a monster-level super genius of the eternal chaotic world. By adding his identity as an inverse cultivator on top of that, his potential is a lot greater than Real God Wu Bei's. That's right. Although Real God Wu Bei is also an inverse cultivator, his comprehension of the power of Heaven Way is not as slick as Jian Wushuang's. The Sanctuary Alliance, the Thunderbolt Island, as well as the experts of powerhouses from everywhere were discussing and exclaiming. Of course, to the Sanctuary Alliance, it was good news to them that such an amazing genius had appeared. However, to other experts or powerhouses who had ulterior motives, it was completely different. At the 4-symbol mansion of the 10 cultivation sanctuaries Colored Glaze Sanctuary, within a lofty palace, the the four-symbol mansion master, as well as many high-level experts of the four-symbol mansion, were gathered together. The fifth level? The four-symbol mansion master was the intimidating man who wore a robe. His eyes, which were glowing with a shrill light, were looking down. How long has that Jian Wushuang been training in the Thunderbolt Island? It has not even been 2,000 years, right? It has been less than 5,000 years since the battle between him and the four-symbol mansion. After such a short amount of time, he was able to clear the fifth level of the Doctrine Palace. Moreover, he also made a breakthrough to real God. If he were given a bit more time, wouldn't he become an almighty? Many high-level experts of the four-symbol mansion who were within the palace had extremely ugly expressions. Jian Wushuang's speed of improvement was indeed frightening. Mansion Master. All of a sudden, real God Kai Hua started to speak. Shouldn't we change the way we treat Jian Wushuang? Kai Hua, what are you trying to say? The four-symbol mansion master looked at real God Kai Hua. Jian Wushuang himself is an inverse cultivator and his power of comprehension is so great. Now, he has managed to clear the fifth level of the Doctrine Palace even though he has only just made a breakthrough to real God. Moreover, with the frightening level of an inverse cultivator, he should be able to get into the real God ranking list when he becomes an eternal real God. If he were to become a chaotic real God, he would definitely possess the fighting capabilities of an almighty. Furthermore, he might be even stronger than real God Wu Bei. Hence, there is no need for the four-symbol mansion to continue making things so difficult for him, real God Kai Hua said. Kai Hua, are you trying to say that the four-symbol mansion should stop going after him from now on? Even though he has killed tens of real gods of the four-symbol mansion in the burning demon region, we should just leave this matter as it is? An elder stepped out and shot down his suggestion. However, real God Kai Hua laughed. The hatred between the four-symbol mansion and Jian Wushuang actually originated from the battle in the burning demon region. You're right. During that battle, the four-symbol mansion indeed suffered big losses as many real gods died. However, those real gods were merely some normal void real gods. Since there are so many void real gods in the four-symbol mansion, it would be considered nothing even if a few of them were to die. Thus, the only thing that can be said to be lost is the four-symbol mansion's prestige. The four-symbol mansion has always wanted to kill him so that we can get back our prestige. If Jian Wushuang's speed of improvement were not so fast, we would indeed be able to take action and kill him when there is an opportunity to do so. However, now, not only he has already made a breakthrough to real God, he is also a member of the Sanctuary Alliance. In addition, his potential is unbelievable. If such a person continues to grow, at the very least, he will possess the fighting capabilities of real God Wu Bei when he is at his peak. With some opportunities, he will probably become another Star Palace Master. If his luck is really good, there might even be hope for him to achieve the level of an emperor in the future. Therefore, it is too risky to go after such a top genius unyieldingly in order to get back some prestige. After hearing real God Kai Hua's words, everyone present became silent. After thinking it through many times, they felt that real God Kai Hua's words were rational. After all, although Jian Wushuang had offended the four-symbol mansion, it was not at the stage where they had to fight to their last gasp. 1649 The 8th layer Jian Wushuang has too much potential and it would be great if we could kill him in time. However, if we are unable to kill him, he will become trouble for us in the future. Moreover, there is still the lineage of Star supporting him. Hence, fighting such a genius with such talents to the death for the sake of prestige is indeed not worth it. The four-symbol mansion master's voice was so loud that it shook the heavens. He then took out a transmission token straight away and sent a message. In no time, he got a reply. After getting a reply, the four-symbol mansion master nodded his head and looked around. I have already negotiated with the lineage of Star. From today on, the four-symbol mansion and the lineage of Star, as well as Jian Wushuang, will keep out of each other's affairs. There is no need for the four-symbol mansion to find trouble for him, and he also does not have a reason to deal with us of his own accord. Mansion Master is wise, real God Kai Hua shouted at once. The other experts within the palace also nodded their heads. At the peak of a lofty mountain in the Thunderbolt Island, Jian Wushuang has cleared the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace. When the Monster King got wind of the news, His face turned hideous immediately and his eyes were filled with an unprecedented murderous intent. This little kid. The Monster King clenched his fists tightly and he took out a token at the next moment. Jian Wushuang has already cleared the 5th level of the Doctrine Palace. His speed of improvement is too fast and we will need to find a way to get rid of him immediately. If not, he will definitely cause huge trouble for us in the future. Moreover, we should not drag this on for too long. The longer we drag it on for, the stronger his abilities will be. Just as everyone was talking about Jian Wushuang, no one knew that he had already left the Thunderbolt Island. Within the Black Void, an ancient spaceship which came from the outside world was moving forward slowly. Within the spaceship sat Jian Wushuang and he was communicating with Hall Master Yuan. Jian Wushuang, the 4-symbol mansion master, has sent me a message personally. Although he did not say it bluntly, he managed to get his message across, saying that he no longer wishes to be enemies with the lineage of Star or you, Hall Master Yuan said. Oh. Jian Wushuang was surprised. In any case, the 4-symbol mansion is an overlord of the 10 sanctuaries. Moreover, I have killed tens of their real gods. However, they actually let me off so easily? Ha ha. Of course they do not wish to let you off. However, they had no choice. After all, the talents and potential that you revealed were too shocking and it caused the 4-symbol mansion to be extremely fearful. When facing you, they had 2 choices. They would fight you to death and there is a possibility that you might die. Next, it might also be possible for you to grow and, in the future, you might destroy the 4-symbol mansion. In addition, you must know that only tens of void real gods died and this was considered nothing to the 4-symbol mansion, apart from damage to their prestige. In order to kill you for prestige, they would risk getting the 4-symbol mansion completely destroyed in the future. Hence, which choice do you think they would pick? Hall Master Yuan laughed. I see. Jian Wushuang could not help but laugh. In the end, abilities were equal to respect. The talents and potential that Jian Wushuang had displayed had already caused the 4-symbol mansion to feel fearful. Hence, the 4-symbol mansion would rather suffer losses than continue fighting with Jian Wushuang. As such, they chose to make up with the lineage of Star. Oh right. Hall Master Huan, have you prepared the item that I want? Jian Wushuang questioned. I have finished preparations for it and I will send it over to you later. However, Jian Wushuang, do you really wish to travel in that place? That place is extremely dangerous, Hall Master Yuan questioned. Of course I know that there is a great amount of danger. However, an inverse cultivator can only grow when faced with difficult situations. Training that is too easy and will only waste my talents. Jian Wushuang laughed. Moreover, my current abilities are probably high enough for me to travel there. Since you have made up your mind, I will not stop you. However, you must be really careful and you must also remember what I have told you previously as well, Hall Master Yuan warned. All right. Jian Wushuang nodded his head. Jian Wushuang rode the spaceship and continued to travel in the sky. Tens of years later, he came before an ancient and big spell. The spell covered a range of hundreds of millions of miles. It was extremely powerful and it was definitely the greatest spell in the eternal chaotic world. The objective of the big spell was to completely seal up the void that it enclosed. As Jian Wushuang was a member of the Sanctuary Alliance, he could pass through the big spell directly. After passing through, he came to the vast void within the big spell. When Jian Wushuang came to the void, he looked at the scene in front of him with shock. It was a boundless void. However, the center of the void was twisted open completely. Over there was a black hole with a diameter of at least 100 million miles revolving. As the black hole revolved, it moved the surrounding void from time to time and this generated air currents. These air currents possessed power to destroy the universe and they could tear the void apart into pieces easily. It was the first time that Jian Wushuang had seen such a big black hole. The feeling that it gave him was that of an unprecedented, ancient, ferocious beast which had opened its large, fierce-looking mouth as if it wanted to swallow the whole universe. Jian Wushuang felt shocked, fearful and even outraged. This is the entrance to the 8th layer? Jian Wushuang's eyes squinted. Previously, he had been training in the Thunderbolt Island. After that, he took a trip to the ancient God Sanctuary. However, for the 2,000 years in the ancient God Sanctuary, He had spent most of his time training. It had been very easy. It would be fine for such an easy training to continue for a period of time. However, if it continued for too long, it would backfire on him. An expert could only be born by training and experiencing hardships. Hence, when Jian Wushuang's abilities achieved a certain level, he decided to travel straight away. As for the place to travel, what he chose was the 8th layer, which was in front of him. In the eternal chaotic world, the most infamous and hence dangerous place was the 8 layers. The 8 layers came into existence a very long time ago. Moreover, they had been known to be dangerous. They had also been ranked in order, with the next layer being more dangerous than the previous one. In particular, the danger level of the 8th layer was considered the lowest among the 8 layers. Normally, only chaotic real gods would have the guts to travel there. Of course, there were also eternal real gods as well. However, these eternal real gods would only dare to travel at the outer layer of the 8th layer, and they dared not go deep in. For the 7th layer, no eternal real gods would dare to go there. Instead, only top chaotic real gods, as well as experts on the real god ranking list, would have the guts to travel there. As for the 6th layer, take Lei Chao of the lineage of Star as an example. Previously, he had gone there to travel. However, even to experts in the real god ranking list, there was a high risk of dying in there. As for the 5th layer as well, the 4th layer, 3rd layer and 2nd layer, which were further in front, only almighties dared to enter them. As for the 1st layer, it was said that even emperor-level super experts dared not travel there. It was absolutely a forbidden area in the eternal chaotic world. 1650 Star Demon. The 8th layer was extremely dangerous. Jian Wushuang could only enter the last 8th layer to wander. Let's go in. After a deep breath, Jian Wushuang didn't hesitate and took a huge stride into the black hole in the front. Passing through the obstacles, Jian Wushuang continued to move forward. He spent about half a month's time to reach the other end of the black hole. It was a world of darkness. There wasn't any sunlight, nor any light in the world. The dark earth and dark mountain to the river of the world were all black. In the void, black mist filled the air. The black mist brought about a pungent smell that made one sick. This black mist, I heard it is poisonous. If an ordinary void real god stays in this world for a few years, I reckon he will be poisoned to death, while an eternal real god could stay for a long while, 1,000 years at most. Only a chaotic real god could survive in this world, Jian Wushuang said. Of course, his ultimate divine body was also at chaotic real god level. Hence, he would be able to survive there. Jian Wushuang took huge strides and plunged forward slowly. His soul power was released entirely and he saw everything in his surroundings. Just as Hall Master Yuan had said, the 8th layer is a total den of monsters. Any ordinary flowers and plants won't exist in here. Only in Black Land and Black Mountain, Jian Wushuang muttered. He plunged for more than 100 miles. Every place he passed was in total darkness and barren. Just then, Jian Wushuang was surprised and he quickly flew downwards to the ground. On the Black Land, Jian Wushuang immediately noticed a strange strength spread from his feet. Even the ground contained the power of corrosion. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and looked at the magical creature before him. The magical creature had a human-sized body. It also had a pair of hands and legs and a head. The only difference from a human was that their bodies were extremely black. There were even places with faint black scales. On their heads, there was no nose but only an eye and a huge mouth. Their mouths revealed crimson, sharp teeth too. This is the Star Demon Clan in 8th layer. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. Star Demon Clan was the property of the 8th layers. In other words, the 8 layers were the 8 layers of Star Demon Clan. There was only one type of living thing in the 8 layers. Besides the human experts who came to wander, there was only one other living thing, which was Star Demon Clan. Read more chapter on free web novel. It was a special tribe that embodied terror and destruction in one. It wasn't human, nor was it an exotic beast. It belonged to magical creatures. The main purpose of the human experts who came to wander in the 8th layer was to exterminate these magical creatures. On the Star Demon's head, there isn't any horn. It should have yet to turn into an adult, Jian Wushuang thought to himself. Before he departed, He asked Hall Master Yuan for information about Star Demon. He knew that Star Demon grew up at a shocking speed while an adult Star Demon was extremely powerful. One could tell they were adults from their body structure. As long as they were adult Star Demons, there would be horns on their heads, and the number of horns varied while their power varied too. Just when Jian Wushuang appeared on the Black Land, the Star Demon noticed Jian Wushuang. There was immediately crimson in its eyes. Cultivator, eat, eat. Simple and immature words fell from its mouth. Then, there was black flowing light that burst out instantly. The speed was much faster than an ordinary void real god. Of course, the speed was nothing before Jian Wushuang. Humph! Jian Wushuang harumphed coldly but never drew out his sword. He merely glanced at the Star Demon once. Eat, eat. The Star Demon continued to mutter, but its eyes closed slowly as his body fell on the ground. Then, it wasn't breathing anymore. Star Demon was also a living thing. Although they weren't intelligent, they had consciousness. As they had consciousness, Jian Wushuang's soul attack could be put to use. Star Demons who have yet to turn into an adult, their power is really weak, Jian Wushuang said to himself. He could tell that the Star Demon before him, although it exploded at a speed faster than an ordinary void real god, its power was only equal to a peak universe god at most. Only when Star Demon turned into an adult and grew horns on its head, its fighting power would only then be compared favorably with a human void real god. Jian Wushuang took a stride forward and came before the dead body of the Star Demon. He stole a glance at the dead body. Jian Wushuang quivered his hand and the Star Demon immediately turned into crimson fog, while the crimson fog displayed a creepy black that gave people the chill down one's spine. No demon spirit? Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows slightly. Star Demon was a kind of magical creature. In Eternal Chaotic World, it was known as the biggest alternative. As a magical creature, its body contained an extremely unique substance, which was the demon spirit. The demon spirit was an extremely unique power. To human cultivators, it was extremely useful. The stronger the Star Demon's power, the more and the purer the demon spirit it contained. Especially those who were adult Star Demon with horns, the demon spirits in their bodies already formed a demon core. The demon core was precious. In Eternal Chaotic World, a low-grade demon core would be valued at 2 to 3 doctrine gems. Then, the Star Demon that Jian Wushuang had killed was obviously a Star Demon who was nurtured not long ago. There wasn't any demon spirit in its body. Jian Wushuang couldn't do anything about it either. Then, he continued his journey again and plunged forward. The 8th lair was really huge. Even when it was compared to humans' cultivation sanctuaries, the size was vastly different. In a huge lair, there were Star Demons all over the place. There were Star Demons everywhere. Some appeared alone and some appeared in a group. The Star Demons shared the same character. They liked to eat. Even between Star Demons themselves, they often ate one another. After a Star Demon ate another Star Demon, it received the other's demon core or demon spirit. In turn, its power would increase. Of course, their favorite food was human cultivators. Hence, in the 8th lair, as soon as the Star Demons saw human cultivators, they would swarm over but didn't care how strong the human was. Even when they saw the human cultivator kill all of its own kind surrounding it, it wouldn't retreat or escape.